All right, as I said, you're stuck with me this morning, so I'm doing the sermon. So this is my first time, so give me a little attitude, okay? I'm a little nervous. Okay, so what I'm going to talk to you this morning about is Esther. So Esther is one of my favorite characters in the Bible. Her story really speaks to me, and so what I want to do this morning in my sermon is kind of share how she speaks to me and how I think she can impact all of us. So the book of Esther isn't a very long book. There's 10 chapters to it, and it's the story of Esther. So you really need to go through the whole thing to really get where I'm going to go with this. So what I've done is I've done a synopsis of the first 8 chapters. The last 2 are a bunch of killing and stuff, so we're going to skip that part. So I've kind of did a little Cliff Notes version kind of thing of the first 8 chapters, and then I'm going to pick some pieces to actually read out of the book. And I'll tell you what those are when I get to them. And if you're going to follow along, this is in the order that it was written, so it might sound kind of weird because it's a little skipping around a little bit, but that's how it was written in the book. So in the beginning of the first chapter, the queen at the time, Vashti, angered the king, Xerxes. I'm going to call him the king from the rest of the time, or King X. When Alicia and Denise and Chris and I did a Bible study on this, we called him King X. So she angered the king because this king, he really liked to party. And he had this long celebration, and then when it was done, he wanted the king. He called for the queen to come see him, and she's like, nope, not coming. And so he was angered by that, consulted his peeps, and they said, you can't let her get away with that because then every other female in the whole kingdom is going to think they have the right to say no to their husband. So he kind of said, you're not queen anymore. And then he put out a decree that a search be made for young, beautiful virgins in all of his kingdom, and he had a lot of kingdom, so that he could choose a new queen from that group of young women. Now, Mordecai is a Jew. He was originally captured and brought from Jerusalem into Babylon. So he was in the primary city where the king was in Babylon. And Esther is actually Mordecai's cousin, but he raised her as his own daughter from that time forward after her parents had died. So Esther was one of these young, beautiful virgins who was, I don't know if she was seized or captured or taken or how, they didn't really go into too much detail about that. But anyway, she was one of the ones that was chosen. And then she was brought to the citadel in Susa. And then there was a person that was in charge of this harem, these women that were brought there. And Esther immediately won favor with this person who was in charge of the harem. And so he gave her preferential treatment. Esther did not reveal that she was a Jew when she was taken into the citadel. Now, the women that were in this harem, they went through a year of beauty treatments and special diet and all kinds of things to prepare themselves to be able to be brought before the king. So when Esther was finally brought before the king, she immediately won the favor and approval of the king above all the other women. And then the king made Esther his new queen. So Esther's queen, Mordecai, meanwhile, discovered a plot that 2 of the king's officers had made. They were plotting to kill the king. So Mordecai told Esther, Esther told the king, the plot was verified, and these officers were put to death because of their will to kill the king. And Esther gave the credit to Mordecai. He's like, he told me he's the one who deserves the credit for this. And then, as the kings did, they had a book of their rule, if you will, so Book of Chronicles. And this was written in the Book of Chronicles about the plot, and that Mordecai was the one that had told people about it. So in I think the next chapter, then a gentleman by the name of Haman was introduced. They didn't really talk too much about him before, didn't mention him at all. But the king honored Haman and elevated him above all other nobles and gave him a lot of stature and credibility. Now, every time the nobles would pass by, the the common folk were expected to kneel and bow and give honor to these nobles. Well, Mordecai refused to do that because Haman was a man. He was not God, and he was not going to bow to this regular old guy. So the guards for Haman continually asked Mordecai, why don't you kneel in front of Haman when he's going by? Why don't you give him honor like you're supposed to do? And Mordecai still refused. And these guards knew that Mordecai was a Jew. And so they decided to tell Haman that this Jewish guy isn't giving you honor anymore. And they thought, well, maybe because he was Jewish, his behavior would not be tolerated anymore. So, and then when they told Haman about that, as you can imagine, Haman was very angry. And not only did he want to kill Mordecai, he wanted to kill all of the Jewish people throughout King X's lands. So Haman got kind of sneaky. So he went and told the king that there was a group of people out there that kind of were doing their own thing, they weren't honoring him, and that they should all be killed off. And the king didn't ask a whole lot of questions. He just trusted Haman. And then they decided between the two of them, yep, they should all be killed. Let's pick a particular day that they should be killed on, and we're going to send out a decree to all of the lands that are under King X's rule, and they're going to write these decrees in their own language so all the people in all the lands know exactly what they're talking about. And then the king put his signet ring on them and signed them, and they sent them out. Now Mordecai found out about this decree because they were kind of posted around the different lands, and he mourned loudly at the king's gate. And Esther heard this, and she's like, well, what's going on? So she sent one of her servants down to talk to Mordecai to find out what was the matter. And then the guard came down, talked to Mordecai, and he told the servant about the decree and urged Esther to use her position as queen to influence the king to stop this decree. And he's like, God put you there for a reason, and maybe this is your reason that you are there. So now I'm going to read from chapter 4, verses 9 through 17. I have 3 snippets I'm reading. This is the first of them. So verse 9 in chapter 4. Hathach, that's the name of the guard, Esther's guard that went down to talk to Mordecai, went back and reported to Esther what Mordecai had said. Oh, I'm reading out of the NIV, just in case anybody wants to know. Then she instructed him to say to Mordecai, all the king's officials and the people of the royal provinces know that for any man or woman who approaches the king in the inner court without being summoned, the king has but one law, that they be put to death unless the king extends the gold scepter to them and spares their lives. But 30 days have passed since I was called to the king. So Esther's, a little concerned that if she goes, she might be killed. When Esther's words were reported to Mordecai, he sent back his answer. Do not think that because you are in the king's house, you alone of all the Jews will escape. For if you remain silent at this time, relief and deliverance for the Jews will arise from another place, but you and your father's family will perish. And who knows but that you have come to your royal position for such a time as this? Then Esther sent this reply to Mordecai. Go gather together all the Jews who are in Susa and fast for me. Do not eat or drink for 3 days, night or day. I and my attendants will fast as you do. When this is done, I will go to the king, even though it is against the law, and if I perish, I perish. So Mordecai went away and carried out all of Esther's instructions. So and then after this, then Esther went, she fasted, she prayed, she went before the king, and luckily for her, he extended the scepter to her, which then spared her life. So the king asked what her petition and request was, and she would have it. She was still held in high favor with the king, and he's like, whatever you want, it's yours. So Esther asked the king and Haman to come to a banquet the next day that she would prepare for them. At the banquet, the king asked again what her petition and request was, and she would have it. She asked that the king and Haman would come to another banquet the next day, and that she would prepare again, and then she would tell the king her petition and her request. As Haman went home after that first banquet, he again saw Mordecai outside the gate. not showing him honor, and he was filled with anger once again. At home, Haman gathered his friends and his wife and bragged about his wealth and his position and how only he was invited to this banquet that the queen was having for the king. And then he also shared his anger about Mordecai to them as well. His friend suggested that Haman have a pole set up, and it's like, I forget how many cubits, it's like 75 feet in the air, I think is what the translation was, set up, and asked the king to impale Mordecai on the pole. Haman liked that suggestion very much because, again, he was pretty mad at him. So one night the king couldn't sleep, so he had his book of Chronicles read to him. When the reader of the book got to the passage about Mordecai unveiling the plot to kill him, the king asked, what honor and recognition did Mordecai receive for unveiling this plot? And then the reader said that there was no honor that was given to him at all. So Haman happened to appear to the king at that time because he was coming to the king to talk to him about putting Haman on this pole. And then the king got to him first and he said, Haman, what should be done to honor someone that the king wants to honor? So Haman, being a kind of a braggart and stuff, thought he was talking about him. So he gave his answer with that in mind. And he said, the king should dress the person in robes that the king had worn, put him on a horse that the king had ridden, and ride him around the streets of the city and proclaim to all the people that this is what happens to people who the king wants to honor. They get this special treatment here. So the king liked that answer very much, and he ordered Haman to go at once and do exactly what he suggested for Mordecai the Jew. So they don't really talk about how Haman felt about that, but I can imagine he was really unhappy about that. But Haman did exactly what he was ordered, and then after he was done, he rushed home. I'm sure he was humiliated and angry, and he told his wife and his friends everything that had happened. Then after that, some people came to collect Haman to bring him to the second banquet that Queen Esther had prepared. So now I'm going to read chapter 7, verses 1 through 6. So the king and Haman went to King Esther's banquet. This is the second banquet. And as they were drinking wine on the second day, the king again asked, Queen Esther, what is your petition? It will be given to you. What is your request? Even up to half the kingdom, it will be granted. The Queen Esther answered, If I have found favor with you, your majesty, and if it pleases you, grant me my life. This is my petition. And spare my people. This is my request. For I and my people have been sold to be destroyed, killed, and annihilated. If we had merely been sold as male and female slaves, I would have kept quiet, because no such distress would justify disturbing the king. I'm reading to verse 6. King X asked Queen Esther, Who is he? Where is he, the man who has dared to do such a thing? Esther said, An adversary, an enemy, the vile Haman. Then Haman was terrified before the king and the queen. So the king ordered his attendants to then impale Haman on the same pole that he put up for Mordecai. A little bit of justice there. And now in chapter 8, verses 1 to 8, I'm going to read that. That's my last excerpt. That same day, King Xerxes gave Queen Esther the estate of Haman, the enemy of the Jews, and Mordecai came into the presence of the king, for Esther had told how he was related to her. The king took off his signet ring, which he had reclaimed from Haman, and presented it to Mordecai, and Esther appointed him over Haman's estate. Esther again pleaded with the king, falling at his feet and weeping. She begged him to put an end to the evil plan of Haman, which he had devised against the Jews. Then the king extended the gold scepter to Esther, and she arose and stood before him. If it pleases the king, she said, and if he regards me with favor and thinks it the right thing to do, and if he is pleased with me, let an order be written overruling the dispatches that Haman, I'm not going to skip the other stuff, devised and wrote to destroy the Jews in all the king's provinces. For how can I bear to see disaster fall on my people? How can I bear to see the destruction of my family? King X replied to Queen Esther and to Mordecai the Jew, "Because Haman attacked the Jews, I have given his estate to Esther, and they have impaled him on the pole he set up. Now write another decree in the king's name in behalf of the Jews as seems best to you, and seal it with the king's signet ring. For no document written in the king's name and sealed with the ring can be revoked." So the decrees were sent out, the Jews weren't killed, and again, like I said, a whole bunch of other killing went on. That's the rest of the story. So last week in CEF, Mike talked about faith, hope, and love, or faith, love, and hope, sorry. We talked about faith being is what we have based on our past experiences. Hope is the present day, love is the present day. And hope are our actions in the future. So Esther showed all of these traits. She shows her faith by asking Mordecai to gather other Jews and fast and pray for her, as she did herself with her attendants before she went before the king. She showed love to Mordecai by giving him credit for exposing the plot to kill the king, and also sending the guards out to talk to Mordecai and find out why he was mourning loudly at the gate. She showed love for other Jews by going before the king so she could request that he stop the decree that Haman had tricked him into signing. She showed hope that the king would still find favor with her and extend his gold scepter to spare her life, and that the king would stop the decree to kill the Jews. Another characteristic that Esther showed was courage. The Webster definition of courage is the mental or moral strength to venture, persevere, and withstand danger, fear, or difficulty. Esther exhibited a great deal of courage to risk death to go before the king more than once and to ask her request. Her faith in God gave her courage to go before the king. My goal this morning is to lead by example. I am comfortable speaking at the podium. You guys have seen me up here before. I can lead meetings. I can read something somebody else wrote. But ad-libbing prayers and presenting a sermon that I wrote puts me way out of my comfort zone. And so my hope is to lead by example, to give everybody else, just because you might not be comfortable doesn't mean you can't do something. It took courage. I lost my spot. It took courage for me to stand before you this morning and run the whole service. Granted, my courage is not because I fear being put to death, so it really doesn't compare to Esther. She has a way higher level of courage than I do. My courage is more of the level of fear of humiliation or just sounding stupid. But I did feel compelled by God to do this. This was a seed that got planted in my head and came out of nowhere, and so I felt compelled that God wanted me to talk to you this morning. So our church is starting a new phase of its journey. We all need to have faith in God that he will get us through the interim period between pastors. We did it before, we can do it again. We need to love each other by being kind to others, helping with what we can, and building each other up. We all need to have hope that our church will be stronger, we will grow deeper in our faith, and we will find the right pastor to get us there. And we can get there on our own in between by helping each other. And we also need courage to step out of our comfort zones and try something new to glorify God. I hope that this morning my words do glorify God. And that was my goal again. Another one of them. So consider being on the governing body, since we do have a slot open. Consider being a worship ministry leader. That spot has been open for a while. Consider being on the pastoral search committee when we get to the point where we're going to form that to start the search for our new pastor. Speak up if you have a new group you want to try, a new Bible study you would like to start, a new mission project, a way to fundraise money for the parking lot. The list is endless as to what we can all do. If you want to, you all don't have to come up and do the sermon, but if you want to do the prayer in the beginning or something, great. Raise your hand to do that. But if you have an idea, bring it forward. We are only stopped by our fear or reluctance to leave our comfortable box. So we should all take a step out of our comfortable boxes. We can make a difference in our lives, in someone else's life, and in the life of our church if we have the courage to do so. That's it. Amen. Thank you.